Hey
So
everybody, welcome to DBT 101. If you haven't already, I encourage you to join our DBT 101 Slack channel. We'll be having polls and side conversations and lots of fun stuff over there. And if you don't already have Slack, head over to community.getdbt.com to quickly join DBT Slack. We'll give you a moment to do that while we go through our introductions. My name is Carly Kaufman. I'm head of solutions architecture here at Fishtown. I joined last summer in July 2020. Gosh, what year is it? It's still 2020, but 2020. Before I joined Fishtown, I want to just tell you about my background and my love affair with DBT. That began in June of 2018. I joined a small Denver-based company called Artifact Uprising, and I was their head of BI, quote unquote, team of one, as many of you might be. And I was tasked with rebuilding their BI capabilities. At the time, they had all of their transformations in Looker as PDTs, and it was a mess. You know, things were running over each other, nothing was building, data was not updated. And prior to joining Artifact, I'd really only used enterprise legacy ETL tools like Informatica and SSIS, neither of which were available at this small company. So I started Googling, how to build custom ETL scripts. And eventually I landed on a blog by Tristan, our CEO, and a very low quality YouTube by Drew, our co-founder, with explaining how to use DBT. And I was up and running in a few days. And this really began my love affair with DBT. And after 2 years of using DBT, I like to say it put me out of a job because it made my life so easy that I just kind of ran out of stuff to work on. So I decided to come over here to Fishtown, and here I am. Love to introduce Alexis next as well.
hello, everybody. Similar to Carly, my background is in data engineering, and I unfortunately didn't have the luxury of using DBT at my job, but boy, do I wish that I did. I was writing a lot of custom Python scripts for ETL and doing cascading views in Redshift. Always a fun time. And realized I liked talking and teaching about data. So now I'm an instructor here at Fishtown. Back to you, Carly.
Thanks, Alexis. All right, so our agenda today. First, I'd like to talk about how did we even get here? Give you a short history of ELT in case you aren't aware. Next, we'll talk about what is DBT. And then Alexis will take you through DBT core concepts. And finally, we'll finish up with some Q&A. But before that, head over to Slack as we have a poll going on right now. And let me just pause for a moment and check Slack. Okay, what transformation tools are you using today?
Oh, we got a few custom Python Airflow. That was the world that I used to live in. Definitely.
Okay, custom is winning so far.
Carly, I'm not familiar with SSIS. Have you worked with it before?
Yes, extensively. And for a few of you who checked it, I can feel your pain. SSIS is Microsoft's product that really just comes with SQL Server. And it's a UI-based tool, but it's not very flexible. So if you make changes to data types, for instance, everything just breaks. But SSIS was actually how I learned ETL and data warehousing. So I am thankful for it. Okay, looks like our winner is custom, with second place being a tie amongst other things. Okay, other. Cool. All right, moving on. So how did we get here? So back in 2020, the focus of many analytics teams was on, things like infrastructure, compute, and storage for large data sets. The questions we were asking were like, how do we build or scale our ETL infrastructure? Like, how do we control for storage costs? And how do we design a data warehouse that's performant? And the Kimball data warehouse architecture, which I'm a huge fan of, really seek to address these last 2 points. And these were things that we as data engineers had to focus on, but they weren't problems really that we wanted to solve. So we usually ended up involving infrastructure or DBA teams to help us, and we became highly dependent on others to really help us do our job. Today, the shift towards ELT and having this unstoppable warehouse tech has really helped address many of these issues. Moving data into the data warehouse is substantially easier. We have ingestion tools like Stitch and Fivetran that automate nearly all this data ingestion process. And this would be the E and the L, the extract and the load in ELT. And then warehouse technology has really removed that infrastructure overhead. Storage is really cheap. And now we have this credit-based payment system and managed query engine, and it removes the need for that complex compute infrastructure. Example with something like Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, if things aren't running fast enough, you just turn up the dial and your company pays a little bit more money for compute, but you're not stopped from making progress. The problem is that data modeling still kind of looks the same as it did back in 2010. Typically, our clients come to us because they're using one of two solutions. The first one, custom code and Airflow. This can be expensive because you need to have really qualified data engineers building out this tooling. It's inaccessible because everything is typically in Python, and it can be slow. Sometimes it can take 3 to 4 weeks to build a new data set, if not longer, and it requires a ton of in-house infrastructure. This can make it really challenging especially if you're a small team trying to get started, that you just don't have the bandwidth to build out that infrastructure. On the flip side, you've got UI modeling, which would be tools like SSIS, Informatica, Matillion, and these can be very expensive just to actually purchase. There's sometimes a very steep learning curve. This leads to trends like I'm an Informatica developer because you've been working with Informatica for 10 or 15 years and you're now that Informatica expert. These can be slow to learn. Like if you want to do something as simple as an outer join, you've got to go figure out, well, what button do I click to do that? And then it also has no version control, no testing, no environment handling. Oh, quick poll. Which of the two of these is this group using? Which I guess Claire kind of already asked, but I'd love to kind of see it in the solution 1 versus solution 2 category. Or let me ask that in a different context. If you're already using DBT, what did you use before you used DBT? So custom code is winning. That's exciting. I do feel like when you come from a custom code background, DBT is really, really easy to pick up. But it's easy to pick up even if you're coming from a UI background as well. Okay, so data modeling still looks the same as it did 10, 11 years ago. And these old methods of data modeling are now ruining this dream of democratized data access. We've got all this other tooling that's making our data warehouse fast and our reporting tools are fast, but then data modeling is still stuck back in 2010. So data sets are slow to build, they're fragile. Customers don't have the data that they need and don't trust what they have. And BI adoption across the board becomes very low, except in teams that can make huge investments in BI teams and infrastructure. DBT addresses these issues with 2 core principles. Number 1, anyone who knows SQL can author their own data pipelines. And 2, DBT enables software engineering best practices. These are things like version control, CI/CD, tests, documentation, reusability, native logging and alerting, allowing you to just transform your data using modular and performant SQL. And we like to call this practice analytics engineering. And there's a link at the bottom of the slide. We'll send out the slides later. You're welcome to read our perspective on what is an analytics engineer. And for those of you who maybe are new to transforming data, why do you care? Why should you transform your data? Why not just load it into Snowflake and let your reporting tool do the job? The reason it's important to transform your data is so you can do things like cleaning data types, deduping data from multiple sources, restructuring your data to fit your reporting needs, filtering out data such as maybe your deleted flag equals yes. You don't want that to make it into your reporting tool typically. Aggregating your data, counting up records, counting up orders, things like that. And finally, joining your data across multiple data sets. Okay, so what is DBT? I'm going to read this slide because I think it's that important. DBT is an open source transform tool that allows anyone comfortable with SQL to author their own data pipelines. And where does it sit in your overall BI stack? It's actually a transformation layer that sits on top of your warehouse. So on the left here, you have data loaders. That would be things like Fivetran or Stitch. And on the right, you have your transform data, and your BI tools would consume that data. So DBT sits right here in the middle alongside your data warehouse. And some of the benefits of DBT is that it's simply pushing down SQL to your warehouse. Your warehouse does all of the compute. DBT does not store or compute any of your data in memory. This means you have more security. You don't have data moving across the network. It's up to 10 times faster. And finally, it's easier to maintain since you only have one set of servers. And you might hear about DBT being open source, Dbt Cloud. What's the difference? So the core of our product is DBT Core, and this is our open source transformation tool. This includes all of your core SQL compilation logic, templating, and database adapter, and you would interface with the open source tool via the CLI. Dbt Cloud is really the fully managed Dbt experience, so it sits on top of Dbt Core, but it also provides you a full ID to develop and test your code if you'd like to use it. You can still use CLI with Cloud. You can also do things like job orchestration. You have logging and alerting, integrated documentation, user authentication, SSO, role-based access group, things like that. So we find that our larger companies, our enterprise clients, really have to have Dbt Cloud. Our smaller companies can kind of go either way depending on what their needs are. All right, I'd like to now transfer over to Alexis.
Thank you, Carly, for giving us that great overview. I'm going to talk about the core concepts of Dbt. So today we're going to be talking about how you can express transforms with SQL. A thing we like to say here at Fishtown is Dbt is all SQL. So if you understand SQL, this is the tool for you. It will automatically build the DAG with refs. If you're not familiar with DAG, it is a dependency model, and we'll show you what that looks like. Test ensure model accuracy. So testing can be, oh, is there an echo? You said, Claire? Okay, maybe it's gone now. Let us know if there's still a problem and we can try to.
Sounds okay to me. Go ahead.
That out. Okay, we're just looking at the Slack. Okay, so test ensure model accuracy. So we have built-in testing in Dbt as well as documentation. So those are some hot topics there, testing and documentation, especially in the data space, and we'll talk about how we address those in Dbt. So for the first core concept, you can express all transforms with select statements. So you can express all your business logic in SQL. No need to write that boilerplate code of, create table or view if it exists, or as I mentioned, I used to do in Redshift a lot with drop views cascading and then recreating all of those dependent views. Dbt is idempotent, so it has repeatable builds. So whenever you do dbt run, which is the command to build all of your models, it will tear down and recreate those tables or views. In most cases, we'll talk about some of the edge cases in a second. You can materialize models with different configurations. We'll talk about tables and views as well as some of the other options. And this makes transform code very accessible because people who have maybe just written SQL can read what is going on in the transform. And we'll look at an example of that in a second as well. So as I mentioned, Dbt generates the DDL at runtime. So over here, we have a Dbt model. And I want to point out off the top of the bat that a Dbt model is not a data model, or if you're done any data science and machine learning model, Dbt model in the Dbt sense means a database object. So the two main materializations are table or view. So a Dbt model is a table or view. We'll talk about some of the other options, but just think of table or view right now. And you can see it could be something as simple as select star from this table and filtering out the deleted fields. So this would be what you would write. And you can see this config block at the top in the curly braces tells it we want to materialize this as a table in your data warehouse. Something as simple as here, when it runs in the database, when you run dbt run, it will create the table. It will wrap your SQL in the DDL that's needed. So here it's going to wrap it in create table, analytics.orders, and it has the SQL that you said. So as I mentioned, Dbt supports several materialization strategies: table, view, ephemeral, which is, you can think of it like a saved common table expression or CTE that you can reuse if you don't want to materialize it into your database as a table or a view. We also have incremental, which is a more advanced strategy that is a selective rebuild for new rows based on a timestamp. As well as Carly mentioned, Dbt is open core, so you can build your own materialization strategy. And we've seen clients definitely do that for when they have more requirements. Great, so Let's talk about the ref statement, which is another core concept of DBT. The ref statement automatically handles dependencies in DBT models. So we'll look at an example of this in a second. You can use it like this, select star from, and instead of putting the actually hard-coded table name here, we can use the ref statement to say what the model is. And what this does is two things. It interpolates the name of your schema. So DBT knows whether you are in your development environment or if it's running in production, and it will create the model in dev or prod. Then it also builds a dependency between the two models, so DBT will understand what order to build the models in. This is really powerful. The ref statement unlocks a lot of this, and let's go to the next slide to see what we're talking about. So over here, we have a very simple DAG. If you're not familiar with the word DAG, as I said, dependency graph or tree is what I like to say it is. And we can see we have perhaps a raw orders table here that we are dumping in through our EL tool. We've loaded into our warehouse, and we want to make a orders model that depends on that. So we're building this, and this is how we do it easily in DBT. So we have our orders.sql. Remember, everything is SQL. So we have some select here. And instead of saying from raw orders, we put in this ref statement for raw orders like this. And when it compiles, this is what it looks like. It's all the same, but DBT, as we said, knows whether you're in dev or prod. So it's going to take from the warehouse and put into the schema. In this case, say we're working on development on our machines. It will say, I know that I'm in dev, so let me put .dev here, and then I know it's from base orders. So when the code is compiled, DBT knows to select that dev environment, and it also helps build this dependency graph. So it knows, it crawls through the code and it knows, oh, this orders model, it depends on raw orders. I can tell because the ref statement is there, and it will build, as you can tell, if you interpolate this outwards, a really nice DAG for us to see what all the dependencies are between each model. So let me show you an example of what that looks like. Here we have a lineage graph for our demo project. And if I click here on orders, for example, you can see that this gets highlighted to show the dependencies. So in this particular demo project that I have, the orders model, which we have written some SQL for, and we used our ref statements, we know that it depends on stage payments and stage orders, which are grabbing from these raw sources of data that we have in our database. Similarly, we can see that a downstream model customers depends on orders, another model that we've made in our demo project. You can think of a more mature DBT project that might have hundreds of models here, and this is where this lineage graph really is powerful because we can see what models depend on what, as well as DBT can do things like, for example, we can see that the Stripe payment and Jawful Shop orders can be the stage payments and orders. They can be built in parallel until here, but then customers needs to wait for, stage customers to also be built until there. So it efficiently will know what it can build in parallel or how many threads it needs to do. And all of this, you don't have to build it. You don't have to, make a diagram and drag arrows. If you just use the ref function in your SQL statements when you're building these models, DBT automatically makes this nice graph for you. Okay, let's go back to the slides. For core concept number 3, easily building tests to ensure model accuracy. If you want to start a thread in Slack about how you're currently testing your data integrity and that your transforms are working correctly, I'd love to see what people are currently doing. So at a lot of places, it can be pretty ad hoc how people are testing their data and their transformations. This is sort of, the darker side of data professionals, right? You might be looking at a dashboard. Maybe you have, since a lot of people are, using custom Python. You might have some tests written in Python to alert you. When I was working as a data engineer, I definitely dreaded stakeholders just coming up to my desk and saying, hey, the revenue pipeline hasn't updated in the last hour, what's going on? So DBT has some built-in tests that will alert you and help give you a heads up on that and help build trust in your data around the company. So DBT is a framework for testing your models and data sets. We can test assumptions that we make about our data, and we store this in a YAML file, which I'll show you an example of in a second. And these assumptions get compiled to SQL that return failing records. So even though we're going to see in our YAML file that we're just adding different tests, particular columns, at the end of the day, as I said earlier, everything is SQL. So out of the box, DBT can test if a column is unique. And I put the name of the tests as you would put them in YAML in parentheses here. So if a column is unique, doesn't contain nulls, only contains certain values, and is a foreign key to another table. So I know some modern data warehouses, you can add some of these things like primary keys or foreign keys, but it doesn't necessarily enforce those. So some people really like these tests for that reason. And what you can do is put these into the way that you run DBT. So for example, if you see that your raw data maybe has some duplicate keys, you can stop the rest of your models being transformed on top of that raw data, or you can just keep it as is, and you can stop your run so that you make sure that bad data doesn't get into the rest of your pipeline. These are the 4 tests that come out of the box. There are also some packages that you can install to get even more tests, or you can write your own tests. So anything that you can write in SQL can be made into a test. This is an example of what it looks like. So this is a YAML file. It is space-aware markdown file, if you are familiar with those. So here we have a model, and we're saying the name of the model is people, and we have some tests on the column of the ID column. So here is how easily you can set up those tests. You just put not null, unique. We generally see those on any primary key. Here is an example of a severity. So for the column of account ID, we have a test of not null. And in this case, we want a severity of worn. And this DBT will take and it will send you a warning, but it won't stop the rest of your build. In this example, we also have a relationships test. So we're saying the account ID and the people model should map to the accounts ID column. And this is a severity error. So this will actually stop the rest of your build. So you can decide which test you want to set as severity of worn versus error. So you have a little bit of configurability there. And then here's another example of an accepted values test. So you can say, here are the list of accepted values. And this could be good for something like, I know I'd have loved this when I was working on the revenue pipeline for accepted values of payment types. So that is how easy it is to configure testing in a YAML file. Now let's talk about the 4th core concept, documentation. Another fun thread we can start really jamming on those Slack threads is, how do you handle documentation at your company? I've heard a lot of different answers over time, which is, oh, well, there's a Google Sheet that some of us update. Maybe there's a wiki that somebody spun up. We don't have any documentation, but people Slack me when they have questions. Also, a question or an answer that comes up a lot. And we know documentation is really important, especially, as Carly mentioned, data democratization, and people start to self-serve when we get all these great BI tools. And documentation is great, but it can often lag behind development as we are changing our transformations. New data is coming in all the time. So for DBT, we have it built into DBT also in YAML files, so that you can update it as you're developing. We think that the closer you can have your documentation coupled to where you're actually developing, the better, and the better it is to keep it updated. So when DBT generates documentation, it takes a bunch of things into account, everything it knows about your project. So you can manually put descriptions into a YAML file, very similar to how we just saw that you make tests. So you can add tests into a YAML file. You can also add descriptions. Model dependencies, as DBT knows what the dependencies are based on that ref function. The actual model SQL, so if somebody has a question about how something is calculated, they can go in and see that SQL. Sources, which would be the raw data. So in our case, there was Stripe data and Joffle Shop in one of the examples I showed you. So it would show you where the raw data is coming from and what tests are configured and running on a particular model. DBT is also going to bring in things from your warehouse. So column names and types and table stats like row count, for example. So it takes all of this stuff and it puts it in a nice documentation site. And let's take a look at an example. There is, I'm going to open up this model, which is a documentation site that Claire, our chat champion today, thanks Claire, put together on MRR. And let me zoom in a little bit so make this bigger. Great. So we can see we've got all our models here in the sidebar, and I have a particular model MRR open here. And we can see that we have details from the data warehouse. So who owns it, it's a view, where exactly it's living, and what warehouse and what schema. We have a description that Claire added here, and this would be in a YAML file that you can add a description. So, you know, a human readable description to give people information on what this view is if you want to click around on your own as well. We've got all the columns here, the data types. Some of them have descriptions, again, that we added in YAML that people can see. And we can also see here what tests. So if I hover over this URN, we can see this ID is supposed to be unique and have not nulls. So we can see the tests there, and we can even put some nicer things like in this change category, we put a little table here to see for each of the options for change category, what the definition is. So that's nice. And if we keep scrolling down, we can go here to see the SQL. So we can see the actual source SQL that we wrote in DBT that has the ref functions in them, or we can switch to the compiled SQL that will have, instead of the ref function, the actually compiled, you know, warehouse schema and table name in it. So for example, if I'm working in my BI tool and I see, you know, so I wonder for change category, how are we defining reactivation? And I could go into this documentation site and see the exact definition. So this is an example of a DBT documentation site that takes into account, as we said, the descriptions that we've added and the SQL, as well as some details from the data warehouse, so that we can all be on the same page when we're talking about some of the models that we've created. Okay, so that was it. Those were the 4 core concepts we wanted to talk about today. There's obviously a lot more to DBT, but this is DBT 101 after all. Let me take you through a quick view of Dbt Cloud, which is the IDE. And so here we go. I have a demo project open. Over here on the left side, we have our file picker. So we can see right here, I'm in my models folder, which is where all of my SQL files live. And I have stage customers open here. And stage customers.sql, I have a simple SQL select statement here. And when I run this, DBT will make a database object called stage customers. And I'm not going to show this right now, but there is another place where you can configure whether it's a view or a table. So here I have my tabs for my files that are open. I can click preview data over here. Whoops. We are getting an error. This is live, folks. I think I might need to refresh this page, but to save you from that refresh, I will say preview data is what you would do to see this SQL, to see what this model would look like. So it will show you rows of data saying when this model is materialized, this is what the data looks like, so you can check it. And then there's also this compile SQL button, which again, I'm getting that error. I can try and refresh in a second. This compile will show you what this ref or this source function in this case is going to actually run in the data warehouse. So that is what a SQL file looks like and how you would in the IDE develop using this preview data and the compile SQL. I'll also show you an example of the YAML file, which we saw earlier. So you can edit your YAML, you can add tests here, you can add a description that will show up in your documentation page. And then here at the bottom is what if you've used the command line dbt, you might recognize. And here's where you can run dbt run. And you can notice there are some other commands that we haven't talked about today. Dbt run is the main command where you're going to materialize your views or your tables. It's going to run all of your models. And we can see that there is a dashboard here that's showing us, did all your tests pass? Did we have any issues? We can see here these models they have a green check, so they were created. And then we can see that we have some tests here that are running. Looks like an accepted values test, checking on the order status column for a particular to make sure we're only returning those accepted values. So that is a quick overview of the IDE, just to give you a sense of what it looks like to work on DBT via Dbt Cloud. And if you are interested in learning any more, we have resources on learn.getdbt.com. So let me just open that right now. And probably for this crowd, you want to check out the on-demand course. And this is a new course that we just put out last year, really excited about, which is a free course where you can watch some videos. It will go over a lot of what we talked about today, but in more detail. There are exercises that you can do, so you can work with that same sample data set that we demoed a little bit today, and then it will take you even further beyond DBT 101 to 201 through 101. It will go over a lot of DBT. So check out the on-demand course. And we also have public courses if you want to join us for a 2-day intensive course. So check those out. We love DBT here because it delivers higher quality analytics, faster and cheaper. Your analytics is higher quality. We've got test coverage in there built in. There's better documentation. So the data modeling and the transformations are more accessible to everybody. We've got testing and logging, so your model is more resilient. It can be faster and cheaper to deliver and, start adding more data sets in. And we find that analytics teams and stakeholders are happier because the stakeholders have the data they need, they trust it. That's a huge thing we're always talking about, which is how do we build that trust in the data set? Analysts feel empowered and have a better workflow so they can collaborate more easily together and bring up their velocity of making changes in their transform layers as stakeholders need it. And data engineers can tackle more complex and challenging workflows. A lot of y'all said that you have custom Python scripts, maybe Airflow or some other orchestration tool that maybe the data engineering team was building up and has to support, but DBT can take some of the brunt of that workload and let data engineers work on more interesting, more complex and challenging work. So that is it for today. Thank you, everyone. Here are our email addresses if you want to reach out. And Carly, I think now we're going into the Q&A section. So is there a way to only fail if some data doesn't pass?
Yes. Yes, I think Claire linked to building out a custom test and setting thresholds. So we do have something for that, but that should be coming later on down the line. We are going to be building a lot of improvements into our text testing functionality coming soon.
Yes.
I think Mark's question about can good data be sent on and bad data be sent to a bad data table, we've actually had that question from other clients. That is a feature request I have put in where you would have your bad data table so you could go and review those records later on. So no, we can't do that today, but yes, that is a great idea.
How do you document your data? Marielle wrote, documentation is my love language. I love the answer. Most people are also saying we don't have any, which is what we've seen a lot.
So the question about using Airflow, I personally have not used Airflow. I don't know if Claire has. I can at least respond to that at a very high level. Many of our customers are using Airflow,
Yes.
and they are just, you simply set up a DBT job, and then you can use Airflow to kick off the DBT job so that you can kind of use Airflow as like a super orchestrator. So maybe you have Airflow do your extract and your load into your data warehouse, and then you call off a DBT job. As far as using the Airflow construct TS, I cannot comment on that one, but perhaps somebody else can via Slack.
Familiar, but there is Dbt Cloud has an API for job scheduling. So you can use an API or webhooks to hook into your DBT. So you can add it to your Airflow orchestration easily like that.
Cool. And I'll take this Looker question from Tyson. I love this question. I love Looker, and I think LookML is great, but to a certain point, I like to draw the line at use Looker for things that belong in Looker. And this would be things like aggregations, percentages, things that you don't want to do in your warehouse. If you back up, you really want your warehouse to be this like shared source of truth, that any system accessing the warehouse gets the same answer. So if you put too much business logic into Looker, then that business logic looks into Looker and no other system can access that. So I like to put everything possible in my data warehouse in terms of business logic. And if it's not possible, if it's something that needs to be done on the fly, then that belongs in your reporting tool. Otherwise, do as little as possible in Looker. This also prevents you from having something like, if all your logic is in Looker, it makes it really hard to potentially change reporting tools later on down the line. Now, you may say the same thing about DBT. Everything is in DBT, and you, by some crazy reason, want to leave us, oh my gosh, it's all in DBT. The good news is that DBT is just a SQL-based tool, so it's pretty easy to port that over.
Yes, and if I could hop on there, also huge fan of Looker. There's a blog article, I believe, from Tristan a while ago that was trying to explain what DBT is, which can be difficult in like a elevator pitch style. And we talk about how the easiest thing to compare us to is Looker PDTs. If you're not familiar with that, it's persistent derived tables. It is basically Looker, you can write SQL in Looker and then persist views in a particular, I believe it's the Scratch schema of your database. So yeah, what Carly said, what we used to think about is when you have a data set that's being delivered to your stakeholders and you need to change it a little bit, it can be really easy when you have Looker, especially, to just quickly do that change in a PDT in Looker. But then eventually, as Carly said, as other tools besides Looker need it, you want to migrate that downstream. Before I use DBT, that would be something like, make a view for it, or maybe eventually a table. But now with DBT in the mix, what you can do is migrate, if you have any existing PDTs from Looker, into DBT, so that it can just be in your warehouse and everyone can use it. But yeah, I mean, we love Looker. And another thing is DBT has a lot more different ways to materialize things, to schedule things. I know Looker has some of those trigger values for PDTs where it's like, refresh this every day or refresh this every time new data comes in. And as we hopefully showed you today, DBT is a lot more fully featured. So PDTs are a great way to understand and like get your foot in the door for like what DBT does.
Thank you. So Mark's question about using DBT in 100% Microsoft SQL Server. I have a ton of Microsoft SQL Server experience, but I have no SQL Server slash DBT experience together. That being said, I know we support it. We have adapters for it. And Claire pointed out we do have a channel for supporting it. Our cloud version of the product does not connect to SQL Server presently, so you have to use open source for that. I think maybe one of the challenges with using SQL Server is that unless they've added this functionality, you can't increase or decrease the warehouse size to handle. Potentially you might, with like something like a Redshift or Snowflake, you'd increase your warehouse size right before you run a DBT run and then decrease it right afterwards. And I don't think you can do that in SQL Server. So you lose a little bit of that flexibility, but it's still a SQL-based tool. So it should be able to work well with SQL Server. But Mark, I'd be interested to hear what blockers you found. I know you can't speak live, but feel free to put them in the chat. Now,
a quick thing I forgot to mention is if you do take the on-demand course, which we really recommend, it's free. There are great videos and exercises, as I said, for you to take your next steps. There is I think it's called Learn on Demand. Is that right? Yeah. There is a Learn on Demand channel in DBT Slack, which you are currently in. And a lot of people who are taking it will ask questions there, and our community is really great. Some of us Fishtown people also hop in there every now and then to answer their questions. So you can make it sort of, it's a self-directed independent video series, but if you need extra help from the community, check out Learn on Demand. Carly and I were happy to have you join us today, and we'll hang out for a little bit in case there's any other lingering questions.